We'll be in 1 Samuel chapters 16 through 20, and we're going to talk about the transition from King Saul to David in Israel. This is the beginning of the transition when the monarchy changes. All right, so we will start with our reading review, and it doesn't look like my remote is working this morning. So we may not have PowerPoint. I just changed these batteries and it's not working already. Well, maybe Kenny can advance the slides for me. All right, so our reading review for 1 Samuel 16 through 20, number 1. The Lord told Samuel that he should not look at what? Right. He's talking about Eliab. He's talking about the oldest son of Jesse, the oldest brother of David. And Samuel's trying to figure out who's going to be the next king. And God says, do not look at Eliab's appearance or at his physical stature. Number 2, why was David brought to Saul?
And then that's faith over fear.
Okay. All right. I think we're looking at the back side there. We're still on the reading review right now. On the front side, and question number 2 on the back side is talking about the lessons we can learn from David facing Goliath.
I got wrong.
Yeah.
A skilled player on the harp.
Right. He was brought to Saul initially because he was a skillful player on the harp. All right. Number 3. How was Goliath outfitted? What did he wear?
Had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shills of bronze, bronze javelin between his shoulder. Now the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels, and a shield bearer went before him. 600 shekels was 125 to 126 pounds. Mm-hmm. And that the other thing that he talked about there was 15 to 17 pounds.
Yeah, there was a lot of weight with Goliath's armor. And it goes to, I think what the record is trying to impress upon us here is just how big and how strong Goliath was. To be wearing this much armor out on the battlefield. Now, compared to Goliath, number 4, how was David armed? He had faith in God, and absolutely that's an important part of the armor. The physical armor that he had was that sling and the stone. He had no sword in his hand. All right, number 5, how did David behave in his duties?
He behaved wisely.
Wisely.
More wisely than all the servants of Saul,
right.
So that his name became highly esteemed.
Yeah, there was a lot of respect given to David as he was playing the harp and as he was fighting. In all the things that he did, he dealt wisely, and he gained a lot of respect there. All right, number 6. Who did Saul give David as a wife? Yeah, his daughter. I think it's pronounced, and I've misspelled it on the PowerPoint, I think it's pronounced Mikhail, but I could be wrong about that as well. There's some different pronunciations that are out there. All right, number 7. What was Jonathan's attitude toward David? And we see it repeated a number of times.
He loved him as his own. Loved him as his own soul. He delighted greatly in David. He loved him as he loved his own soul.
Yeah, there was a deep love between these two. His soul was knit to him. That's in chapter 18. He loved him as his own soul. Chapter 19, chapter 20 says he delighted greatly in him. All right, number 8. What was Saul's attitude toward David?
He was afraid of David.
He was afraid of him to the point where he was his enemy continually. Now, that's not how it started, and we'll look at the shifting attitude of Saul over time. But there in chapter 18 and chapter 18 verse 29, chapter 19 verse 17, shows the fear and the enemy aspect of it. Number 9. How did Saul respond to Jonathan's answer about David's absence? He was angry. He was angry. He said, "You son of a perverse, rebellious woman." He was not happy at all. And I bet Saul's wife wasn't too happy about what he said, because he called her a perverse, rebellious woman. So, all right, and number 10. How did Jonathan indicate to David that he should flee? What was the signal that he gave?
Go your way, for the Lord has sent you away.
Okay. How did he indicate that? Because he didn't actually say it to him. He gave a signal out in the field.
It's not the arrow beyond you.
Yeah. He shot the arrow, and he told the servant that the arrows were beyond him, and that was the indication to David that he should flee. All right, let's go over to our discussion side, and let's look at number 1. In what sense was the distressing spirit or evil spirit from the Lord? And this is from 1 Samuel 16, 14 and 15. What do you have?
In the New King James Version, a donkey loaded with bread, a skin of wine, and a young goat. In the American Standard Version, I will shoot 3 arrows on the side thereof as though I shot it at a mark. And in the King James Version, it says the same thing.
Okay. All right. Anyone else have some thoughts on the distressing spirit or the evil spirit? Okay, and then Mary.
In a permissive judicial sense, acting as a consequence for Saul's disobedience and rejection of God's authority, not as an evil act initiated by God. After the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, 1 Samuel 16:14, this spirit was allowed to inflict him, serving as divine judgment and bringing on mental distress, paranoia, and depression.
Okay, so it's a permissive, not something that God initiated, but rather it was a consequence for Saul's disobedience. That's some good thoughts there. All right, Mary?
I was basically going to say his conscience got him because he was obeying God.
Okay. Yeah, so there's a point that you get to where you don't care what you do anymore. And we need to be very careful that we don't get to that point, right? The major difficulty of this passage comes in reconciling the perfect holiness of God with his action in sending an evil spirit upon Saul. The second difficulty is in regard to the nature of the evil spirit which Saul received. Was this an objective demonic reality, or was it an evil effect like a mental or a physical illness? So the problem centers on how God, who is a perfectly holy being, can allow an evil spirit to come from him. We first have to distinguish between the power of God and the will of God. One of the earlier names for God was El Shaddai, or God Almighty. We understand that God has the power to do all things, but it does not follow that God has to will what his power would make possible. God has the power to send Satan right now into the eternal hell, but as of yet he has not willed to do so. It follows that both good and evil beings exist. Angels and hosts of wickedness exist. God could destroy these demonic principalities and powers. He lets them continue. He permits them to continue. If we conclude that this evil spirit from God in 1 Samuel 16:14 is an actual spiritual being, or if it's simply an evil consequence in Saul's life, it presents no greater problem than the existence of any other evil in the world. There can be no genuine freedom of moral choice if God, by his power, always blocks what free moral agents choose to do, or if he prevents the consequences of those actions. So in what sense did the evil spirit come from Jehovah? Like Kay said, it was a permissive thing. He didn't initiate this act. Since anything that happens is weaker than the power of God who is almighty, in one sense, God can be considered responsible for anything that takes place, be it good or evil. Thus God can say, I make peace, and create evil, Isaiah 45 and verse 7. In fact, when God accomplishes some purpose of his will by using the evil choices of man, it is not unusual to assign the cause to God. God hardened Pharaoh's heart, Exodus 10 and verse 1. Did he do it in such a sense that Pharaoh could not obey? No, it was a consequence of Pharaoh's disobedience. It was his choice, not God's choice, to disobey. 1 Chronicles 21:1 states that Satan stood up against Israel and moved David to number Israel, but in 2 Samuel 24:1, the author there speaks of God as moving David to act against the children of Israel by numbering them. Satan was the active agent in that temptation, but God used him to carry out a certain judgment against Israel. We might hold then that the evil spirit from Jehovah was by the permissive will of God. Although it was an evil directly brought on by Saul's disobedience, God used it as a means of bringing David to the throne with the loyalty of the people in harmony with his divine plan. Now, regarding the second difficulty of the passage, was this evil spirit a demonic being, or was it an emotional or a mental illness? Many commentaries favor the latter view, and in consideration of the meaning of the term spirit used by the Hebrews, it would be hard to say dogmatically that it was not the case. Spirit in the Hebrew language was a broad term, broader than our word, and much like the Greek word for spirit, it could mean breath, word, attitude, wind, will, not word, I'm sorry, scratch that. Breath, wind, attitude, will, inner being, influence, or some spiritual being. Possibly God allowed Saul to be smitten with periods of great despair and hopelessness. However, the force of the words in 1 Samuel seem to imply something more than that. One explanation would be that a demonic spirit possessed Saul, whose influence was heightened by Saul's own willful disobedience. God allowed it to happen. It was a consequence of Saul's disobedience, a consequence of Saul's choices. All right, any other thoughts? I know that's a difficult question, and we really don't have a definitive answer on it. There are ways to understand it without violating other scriptures that may or may not be correct. But does anybody have any other thoughts on number one? All right, number two. What are some lessons that we can take away from David's face-off with Goliath? Okay. Rely on faith over fear. Trust in God's power over human strength. Acting courageously in the face of mockery. Use your own unique skills and gifts. David was armed with a sling, not a sword.
Sometimes God chooses the unlikely. God chose David over his older and stronger brothers.
Sometimes God chooses the unlikely. You compare David to his older, stronger brothers, and we see an unlikely choice. Absolutely. All right. Are there any other thoughts? So I approach this question sort of from a figurative view. David faced a literal giant. Do we not face giants in our lives, spiritually speaking? Problems sometimes come as giants. We all have these giants, these challenges that loom large on our horizons, problems that make our knees grow weak. And we can look at how David faced this literal giant Goliath and learn some lessons about how we might best face the figurative giants that come our way. Number one, giants come when we least expect them. We realize that David's three oldest brothers went with Saul against the Philistines. David, the youngest of Jesse's sons, he had responsibilities at home. He had to tend to the sheep. Jesse, though, decided to send some grain and loaves by David's hands to the others. And while David was in the valley of Elah with them, he heard Goliath's challenge. He had not planned to jump into the fray. He was there delivering supplies and food and things to his brothers, but because of the type of person he was, he could not ignore the giant when it showed up. Second, we have a choice in how we face the giants in our lives. We see both fear and faith in this chapter. The text says when Saul and all of Israel heard these words of the Philistines, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Another verse says dreadfully afraid. David's response was quite different than this. He said, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" He said, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." How much confidence do we have in God? How much do we trust Him to accomplish His will? Do we shrink away from the responsibilities set before us? Or do we arm ourselves with the sword of the Spirit, knowing that He is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think according to the power that works in us, Ephesians 3:20. We need to give God more credit in our lives and understand how powerful He is. The next one, when we make the decision that we are going to step up and face our giants according to God's will, we need to understand that there's likely going to be some opposition. There are going to be some people who discourage us from going forward with that. David faced it from the government and from his own family. Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was aroused against David. And he said, "Why did you come down here? With whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and the insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle." Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him. You're just a kid. You are a youth, and he is a man of war from his youth." The king and his own family stood against David, but he knew that God's opinion was more important and more weighty than any man's opinion. That's all that really mattered. Don't let others discourage you from obeying the will of the Lord, the word that He has revealed through His inspired apostles and prophets. Number 4, recognize that preparations need to be made before we face those giants. Those preparations need to be made before they arrive. David had experience dealing with danger as a shepherd. That was a part of his job. He fought the lion. He fought the bear. He protected the sheep. He said in 1 Samuel 17:36, "Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God." He didn't know that he was preparing to face a literal giant when he was in the wilderness with his sheep. He didn't realize how valuable that experience would be later, but when he came up against Goliath, he saw the value in it. This is why Bible study, both individual study and in a group like this, is so important. You are being prepared for something right now. You may not realize it until you come to face with your giants. There's one final one there. We must have the right motivation in our fight against the giants in our lives. David was not fighting out of selfish pride, as Eliab had accused him, nor was he fighting with arrogance in his own abilities. He stood up because he recognized the blasphemy of Goliath, and he revered the awesome power of God. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should stand against the armies of the living God? The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion, from the paw of the bear, He will deliver me from the hand of the Philistine. And David said to Goliath, "You come to me with a sword, with a spear, with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you've defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air, to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and He will give you into our hands." His faith was not in his own power, it was in God's power. And again, back in Ephesians 3, God is able to do abundantly, exceedingly more than anything we ask or think. Whatever you can imagine, God can do more. Any other thoughts on David's battle with Goliath? All right, number 3. What does the inspired text reveal about King Saul's shifting attitude toward David in chapter 18? Mary?
Can see a little bit of his wishy-washiness toward God.
Sure. Yeah, there's some wishy-washy kind of attitude towards God in how he viewed David, isn't there? Yeah, because David was upright. He dealt wisely before him, and Saul didn't like it. What does the light do? It exposes the darkness, doesn't it? All right, Thomas, do you have thoughts?
Okay, 18, 1 through 9, the initial favor and jealousy. Saul keeps David close, but the public praise for David's military success makes Saul angry and jealous and suspicious. Fear and persecution in 18:10 through 16, and manipulation and plotting in 18:17 through 29, and then Saul tries to use his daughter Merab and then Michal as traps, hoping David will be killed by the Philistines in the process of paying the bride's price, which is 100 Philistines' foreskins.
Mm-hmm. Other thoughts? Go ahead. He became David's enemy continually. Now, this is vastly different than when they first met, right? Back in chapter 16, David was skillful with the harp. He came before Saul. He was able to relax him and refresh his spirit. There was some love and respect between these two men initially. But then by the time we get to chapter 18, we see that anger, that jealousy, that suspicion being aroused in Saul. As we continue, we see that jealousy turn into rage and the distressing spirit coming upon Saul. He threw a spear at David when he came to play the harp for him. David escaped, and that caused another emotion in the king, fear. He recognized that the Lord was with David, protecting him. He sent David out to the battlefield, hoping that he would die in battle. He promised his older daughter to David, then married her off to someone else, so he promised the youngest daughter to David. If he simply delivered the dowry, 100 Philistine foreskins, surely he's going to die in that attempt, right? And David was able to double the dowry. He didn't die. Saul was afraid of David, more and more recognizing that the hand of the Lord was in all that had transpired, and so Saul became David's enemy continually. David went from a beloved servant and soldier to a feared enemy. How about number 4? To whom did David flee in chapter 19? What example does this set for us?
David fled from King Saul to the prophet Samuel at Naioth, whatever that word is, in Ramah, seeking godly counsel and finding refuge in the Lord, and seeking spiritual mentorship and trusting God's protection, refuge in God's presence.
Who did Samuel represent? He was a prophet of who? Prophet of God. And so by going to Samuel, in a sense, David was going to God, was he not? He was in a terrifying position. He was innocent of any wrongdoing. Saul had designated him as an outlaw, though. He devoted the resources of the whole kingdom of Israel to the task of hunting David down and killing him. Samuel was a true prophet of God, so David seeks him out for advice and protection. In fleeing to Samuel, David made God his refuge, trusting in the shadow of his wings. Where else can a good man go and feel himself safe? Where do we go when we face danger? We may never be in a position where our physical life is in danger, where we're on the run from the king or the government. But every time a temptation comes before us, our spiritual lives are in danger. To whom do we turn? Do we talk to our worldly friends who really have an improper concept of spiritual things and don't really have the same goal of eternal life? Or do we do a Google search where you can find someone to tell you whatever answer you want, right or wrong? Or do we turn to God? Do we turn to His family, the church? Hebrews chapter 10, verses 24 and 25, let us consider one another in order to stir up love and good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as is the manner of some, but exhorting one another, encouraging one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. The more trouble we face, the more time we should spend with God and with His family. For those who are not personally experiencing the trouble, we need to be strong for our brothers and sisters who are going through those struggles, who are experiencing things that perhaps are beyond our worst imaginations. We need to encourage them through the Word. Be trustworthy advisors. Do not be judgmental, but be loving. Offer to help in whatever way you can. They already know they are in danger. They don't need to hear from us our opinions of how they could have avoided it. That's already passed. What they need now is support as they work through it and beyond it. Moving forward in faith. Any other thoughts on number 4? All right, last question. Number 5, discuss Jonathan and David's friendship. How did they become friends? When did they meet?
One of the Bible's most profound examples of conventional love, loyalty, and self-sacrifice.
Love, loyalty, and self-sacrifice. The relationship that Jonathan and David had with one another. It's beautiful. It's true friendship. Jonathan was willing to turn against his own family, against his own father, because he knew right from wrong. And he had that special connection with David. He met David shortly after the defeat of Goliath. David stood before Saul with the Philistine's head in his hand. Jonathan was no doubt standing by his father's side. That description is the setting for the first verse of chapter 18. It came about when David had finished speaking to Saul that the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David. On the surface, David and Jonathan had very little in common. Jonathan was older. He was an experienced warrior. David was just a lad. Jonathan was a prince of the land. David was a poor shepherd boy. Friendship can cut across any barrier. There's something about David that spoke to Jonathan's heart. Perhaps he felt a kinship with David because of courage. Maybe Jonathan was attracted by the belief that this man had, who trusted in the power and the strength of the Lord, and how that contrasted with the way his father often behaved. One version says that Jonathan found himself inwardly drawn by David's character. Then we are told Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. It's the kind of love that's referred to in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18, love your neighbor as yourself. One expression of that love is to supply the needs of the one loved, and that was the first thing that Jonathan did. He stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David with his armor, including his sword and his bow and his belt. One translation says that Jonathan sealed the pact by giving David those items. David was soon fighting right alongside Saul and Jonathan. The Lord was with David, and he enjoyed great success. These victories won him much widespread acclaim, so that Saul was filled with jealousy and hatred. The king became David's enemy continually, and Saul gave that order to put David to death. But Jonathan, Saul's son, who greatly delighted in David, made an impassioned plea for his friend. Jonathan stood up for David. Friends do not desert each other in times of trouble. Saul rescinded the death sentence for the moment. There are good friends and there are bad friends. We'll talk very briefly about friendships in the sermon this morning. And one of the verses that we'll look at is 1 Corinthians 15:33. Do not be deceived. Evil company corrupts good habits, or bad company corrupts good morals. Real friends encourage us to do what is right. They discourage us from doing what is wrong. Think about the people in your life. Do you have a friend like Jonathan? Are you a friend like Jonathan? Any final thoughts on our lessons today? Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
When Jonathan gave David his robe and armor and sword and everything, one place I read last night said that symbolizes the transfer of royal right to the future king.
That's interesting, and it may be the case because Jonathan does recognize, at least later on, maybe not initially, but he recognizes later on that David is going to be the next king. And so that's very possible that he recognized it very early on. Yeah. Anything else? All right. Next week, we will finish up 1 Samuel, 11 chapters in 1 week. All right. So be prepared to go through that. We do have the sheets on the front pew up here on the right side of the auditorium. Thank you for your attention this morning.